Y'all, I had my microphone off. Thank you, Samantha. Let's start again. It is a dark and stormy night. Perfect for screwing something up. Man, I don't usually do live on here, so I do live on my other channel primarily, but this one not so much. So I am not going to waste any more time. I've already highlighted all of y'all. Hello to everybody in the chat. I did say hello, Jennifer. I hope you're doing okay because I think about you and everybody over in Western North Carolina with all of the snow and whatever kind of storms y'all are having. God love you. But tonight, we are going to talk to somebody that we emailed and then we talked on the phone because he sent some great paranormal stories, which I read months and months ago. And he is going to tell us those because they're always better when the person who experienced it is telling the story. And he's got some more stories for us. So, hello, Donald Allen and Curious Phoenix. All right, let me introduce to you Rick. Uh, Hold on, let me add you back. Somehow or another, we got you
Hi,
all.
still.
Hey, how are you doing? Oops, I
I'm great.
cropped
I
you
hear.
out.
Oops, where am I? There I am. I hear
Yeah,
it's a
because
dark
I
and
am. Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
I hear it's a dark and stormy night. A good night for ghost stories.
Here, there we go. Um, Man, yes, it is a good night for ghost stories. It's a perfect night for ghost stories, so long as a tornado doesn't come through Alabama. And So yeah, I am just all over the place, y'all. So sorry if you're used to my lives on Silky Southern. Y'all know I usually have it more together than this. Good lord.
Well,
I've got.
I was afraid I was afraid it was going to be me messing this up because I am not very good with technology at all. So the fact that I can hear you, you can hear me, and they can see us, that's amazing. So
Yeah. Well, it's just everything is set different for me than on my usual lives. So I'm like, I'm just hitting screens, and I'm like, why is that like that? Never mind. We're good now. We're good. All right. So, Rick, tell
yes,
us a little bit about, I don't know, maybe we talk so much on the phone. Maybe a little bit about your family history, kind of how the paranormal floated down.
yeah, it does happen. For me and my family growing up, it was sort of a given. The paranormal was not strange. It wasn't laughed at. It was taken for granted. Okay, that happens. My my I was raised by my mother's family, who were basically Native American, and my mother was raised out of the culture. Her mother, my grandmother, was raised out of the culture, but she was half Sioux. My mother was three-quarters Native American. Her father was full blood. So, you know, whether or not that has anything to do with it, at least the spirituality had um, had a process to where this was something that happens. And my grandmother was very psychic, very intuitive. She would wake us up in the middle of the night if someone was having a problematic birth, and she always knew everything. And she ruled our family with an iron fist, and that's an important thing to know before I tell this story about her. And then my mother, her daughter, uh, was a born medium. She could see the dead, she could sense the dead, and she did not like it. She did not like it at all. It terrified her. When she would see spirits, she said she'd just pull the blanket up over her head. Or one time I went over her home, I said, Mom, why is your armchair facing the corner over there when the TV's here? And she said, well, that spirit walks down the hallway every night and stands at the end of the hallway and stares at me. She said, it just gives me the creeps. So if I'm facing this way, I can look at the TV out of the corner of my eye and I don't see the ghost. And I'm like, okay. And she said, no, really, I'm taking my meds. I'm not crazy. And but I do feel that similar to when you're traveling to another country and say you're an American and you hear people speak English, you're like, oh, there's somebody that can understand me, somebody that knows what I'm trying to communicate. Particularly if you don't know the local language. And I feel that the dead are the same when it comes to mediums. They know that these people can interact with them, can sense them, and they come to them. And, in some cases, people are like, oh, this is wonderful. I'll communicate with you. Whereas my mother just said, oh, no, no, hell no. And did not like it. And her niece um, uh, has inherited that. There are spirits that unfortunately follow her from home to home. And yeah, it's sort of a thing with the women in my family. And I get a little psychic thing every now. I've had some psychic things happen. Nothing important like lotto numbers, but I've had some incidents. But I have had paranormal, and I think it's basically because I travel a lot, I move a lot, I put myself out there a lot, and I'm in different situations. So you're sort of bound to eventually, and if you're in tune to it, you're bound to have an experience or two or three. So
Or 150,000
yeah,
like me. I get it.
yeah,
I really do. And it's interesting because you have been in so many situations. Like you've seen it from your family, you've seen it in business, and then your private life. So it is kind of one of those things. You were talking about the psychics, and that's what everybody says. If you're psychic, how come you can't win the lottery?
yeah,
That's always the question. I'm like, yeah, why? I would not call myself psychic at all, but I would say, I'm very in tune at times with the paranormal, and I'm like, oh, yeah, why do I just see things? Why can't I see lottery numbers?
exactly.
You know,
Important stuff like that. I turned to a
exactly.
coworker once. I turned to a coworker that I wasn't particularly fond of, and looked at her, and she said, "Do you have a problem?" And this was years ago. I said, "Are you pregnant?" And she said, "Why would you say that? Don't even say that." She said, "No, I'm not pregnant." She walked in like 5 days later and said, "Oh my God, I'm pregnant." And I looked at her, and the first thing that popped in my mind, I just heard myself say, "Twins?" She said, "Don't say that. They run on both sides of the family." And she had twins. And,
Oh
there's
wow.
some other, and I've had interactions like that with friends, and dating me is not a good idea. I did catch somebody who was cheating on me because I just knew. And I looked at them and I said, "You?" And they said, "Oh," and I told them who they were with. I told them the name because it just pops into your head. And I said
Hmm.
it out loud. I thought, well, I'll just sound like a crazy person, but I'll say it. And they went, "How did you know? Who told you?" So I wish it was something important like a lotto number, but not so much. But the the thing with my grandmother being so psychic, she woke us up in the middle of the night once to tell us that my cousin was having a difficult birth, and we had to get to the hospital. And I remember it was the middle of the night when the phone hadn't rung. We said, "Are you sure?" And then the phone rang and said, "Get down to the hospital. This is happening." So, and a number of those things. But the main story, if you would like me to share about my grandmother, Nana, uh, she was amazing. She was is an amazing, powerful, wonderful woman. Raised this huge family, and like I said, ran the family. Um, she had three daughters, my mother and her two sisters, and her one daughter, my aunt Virginia, and her husband had a beautiful boat, beautiful, beautiful 85-foot boat with a little fireplace on it and an organ that they built in because Aunt Virginia loved to play the organ. So this was a nice boat, and it was a yacht. And Aunt Virginia and Uncle Alfred had taken this yacht down the coast, and they were heading down to Mexico. We're all based out of LA, so they're going down the coast of Mexico, and they got into a hurricane, a horrible storm. And my aunt and uncle described it later as that movie, The Perfect Storm, where the waves are so enormous. They said they were in deep troughs like valleys and at the tops of these huge mountainous waves. So the wind was howling, and eventually my uncle had tied my Aunt Virginia to the cabinetry and tied himself to the wheel. And they were pretty certain they were going to not make it, and they prepared to say goodbye to each other, and because they couldn't decide whether to go keep continuing, on their course or to turn around and come back, because no matter which direction, it was horrendous. They said that's the point where as the winds were howling and the waves were crashing and they're tied to the boat, that they turned and my grandmother was standing there and my aunt's mother. And my grandmother had passed 15, 20 years before. And there she stood looking as imperious as ever with her arms folded across her chest, glaring at them. And their jaws dropped.
Oh
And
God.
my grandmother pointed at my Aunt Virginia and said, Virgie, what are you doing here? Go home. And they said they looked at each other and they were in shock. They were just in shock. Now, these are two people that if you had told them that you had had this experience, they would have laughed you out of the room and they would have made fun of you for the rest of your life. These people had no spiritual belief and no, this just wouldn't have, no, they did not believe in this stuff. And if you had told them you'd seen a ghost, they would have just thought you were insane or smoking, who knows what. So, and yeah, and so they said, there was, and my uncle said, there was your Nana. She was standing there, and she pointed
Wow.
to her Aunt Virginia and said, Virgie, go home. I said, well, what did you do, Uncle Alfred? He said, when your dead mother-in-law tells you to turn the boat around, you turn the boat around.
Absolutely.
And they managed to make it back to port hours later, back to San Diego. Um,
Wow.
they, and they said it was a horrendous journey, but they lived. They lived through it to tell this tale. And they said when they did finally dock and tie the boat off and get in the car in the Mercedes, he always had to say which car it was, the Jag, the XKE. He goes, we got in the Mercedes and we're driving home and we both simultaneously and looked in the back seat, looked at each other, and Michael Alfred looked at his wife, Myra Virginia, and said, what did you see? And she said, what did you see? He said, I saw your mother. She goes, yeah. Said she was sitting in the back seat. She always sat in the middle and folded her arms and blocked the rearview mirror. And he would tell her to move. And she said, look around me. And she goes, I like it here. He goes, and she was right there. We turned. We both jumped out of our shoes, almost drove off the road. And then she was gone. He says, but she was looking out after us. And she got us home. Said she got us home. And they told the whole family that story. We all stood and looked at them, and they said, "We are serious. You know who we are and how we are, and this happened. This happened." And after that, when I was a kid, I remember that, and probably a teenager, and I do know that it made an impression on everybody. And my uncle Alfred said, if anybody could cross the veil, it's your grandmother. And he says, now I know there's something afterwards. Now I know there's an afterlife. And my Aunt
Wow.
Virginia said, too, and everybody they found went, oh, okay. There was all those psychic things growing up, but Nana came back after she had passed, and she was seen by another member of the family, and she
Wow.
stood at the foot of their bed and said, she didn't know that what had happened. She goes, I've had a heart attack. I'm okay. Don't worry about me. And then she disappeared again. So she was seen by a couple of people in the family after she passed.
Wow. You know what I think of when you tell the boat story is in the middle of the storm. Okay, it's already crisis mode. I
Mm.
don't know if I would turn the boat around or if I saw a dead relative, I might jump off the boat and just say it's over.
Yeah,
It's over. I'm done.
I, I think I'd be with you too. Ever since and my mother passed away, and her being a medium, and my grandmother passed away, her mother, and they've both been gone. And I have to say, I live alone, and occasionally I look around and think, please don't appear to me because I will have a heart attack and die, and I'll be joining. So I'm very jumpy that way. Whereas I have peace with it, and I think it's wonderful and beautiful. Give me a warning, knock on the wall, turn some lights on and off, slowly materialize. Just don't. If I turned around and they were standing there like they did, I would have just jumped off the boat screaming. So
Oh wow. Yeah. I mean yeah, at that point, I don't know. I don't know what I'd do. I'd like to think I'd turn the boat around, but that is pretty spooky. I don't know. I'd like to think I'd take it as a warning. But
yeah,
you have also had some experiences that were work related. And that's
yes.
one of the stories I read also, but it is much more entertaining to hear it coming from you.
Oh, it's much more entertaining to hear it than have it happen to you. Um, I was most of my life. I fell into being a florist somehow. I was the delivery kid for a flower shop, and it was something I could do easily, and something I did in between all my art shows. I was going to be an artist, and at one point, I ended up starting my own business. I ended up at Sunset Magazine, and I did celebrity things and lots of events. And then because I was good with the nervous hysterical brides, they used to send me all the nervous hysterical brides. So I became the wedding guy, and very popular in Monterey Bay. And lots of weddings there. It's a beautiful, Monterey Bay is exquisite. Carmel, Monterey, Santa Cruz, and it's this beautiful bay with all these exquisite venues, facing the ocean. That's where everybody wants to get married. So I did that for 20 years. I had a business, maybe 10 years prior to that with somebody else, and then started my own business. Had that for 20 years. One of my venues was the beautiful Monterey Bay Aquarium, and that had been a cannery and Cannery Row, the book Cannery Row, and just this enormous cavernous old building that they've converted, thanks to the Packard Foundation, to this exquisite um, aquarium. Just huge tanks and sharks and kelp forest, and it's beautiful, and it goes on for thousands of feet. I was there setting up a wedding once and bringing my flowers, and my assistant had not been able to make it that day, and so I was by myself. And I'm the last person there. The tables are set, the candles are lit. The last thing that goes on the table is the flowers. So I'm running back and forth, and that was 20 years ago, but still I was not that young, and I was exhausted, and I was carrying these huge, heavy things back and forth and running, and nobody's around. And I kept running to this little room, little tiny kitchenette, and filling these big vases with flowers and running back and floating flowers and candles. And at one point, I just kind of gave up, and I collapsed over a table and a counter in this little kitchenette and said, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. I can't. I'm exhausted. This is killing me. And I heard a voice very distinctly behind me say, "You're telling me." And I turned and nobody was there. And just the tone of the voice, and, it felt wrong. And I turned, and it was a 10 by 10-foot room. So I threw the door open, and for hundreds of feet, either direction, maybe 1,000 of that feet, that direction, uh, nobody, not a soul. And I realized that I had just heard a spirit, a ghost. And I was so busy and so angry and working so hard, all I could do was say, "Well, thanks. It's nice to know somebody's paying attention." And I went back to my work and finished it all and finished the wedding, and then took off and had dinner and spent the evening at a restaurant. Came back when the wedding was over to move everything and load up my truck again. And as I left, I went to the event planner there in the office and said, thank you for the reference. That was a big account. I made lots of money with that wedding. And I said, "Oh, by the way," and she said, "Oh yeah." She goes, "Oh yeah, Rick, by the way," she goes, "your flowers are wonderful." She goes, "We'll refer you again." I said, "Thank you." I said, "By the way, so the place is haunted, huh?" And she started, and she kind of sat back in her little office. She goes, "Oh, no, no, no." She goes, "Those are just stories that the employees tell each other to frighten each other. Don't listen to the employees." I said, "No, no, an employee didn't tell me anything." I said, "Dot, dot, dot happened." I said, "And, there was a ghost behind me. And he told me, you're telling me." And she went, "Oh." She looked around. She goes, "Okay, yeah, the place is haunted." And she goes, "We have quite an employee turnover because occasionally he will not just say something behind you. He'll put his hand on your shoulder. You won't see the hand. You'll feel it. You'll turn. Nobody's there." She goes, "Yeah, as if that's not creepy enough." She goes, "There have been employees that have said they've looked off into the corners of the darkness and seen a man in 1920s, tweed cap and overalls, work clothes, just standing in the shadows, staring at them. And when they blink, he's gone. And then later on,
Oh
a hand
wow.
on your shoulder and a couple voices." She said, "We lose lots of employees that way." She says, "Please, please don't share this story." She goes, "Because, people might stop bringing their children to the aquarium. So where am I now? On the air telling everybody. So sorry.
So sorry, yeah. But w- there are so many people, I think, nowadays that are interested in the paranormal. I think people are just looking for proof of afterlife or
Hmm.
whatever, some kind of hope. And I feel like because of that, she could just tweak her business a little bit and say it's the haunted aquarium. And you would probably get
Exactly.
a ton of people.
Yeah, I had another experience I didn't even tell you about. I had some friends that had a metaphysical bookstore, and it wasn't just a Wiccan bookstore. It was every kind of, the places where you buy crystals and, a picture of an Indian riding a unicorn and, things like that. And it was just a metaphysical bookstore, but it was for real, and the people that owned it were for real. And at one point, through some process, there was a spirit running loose in the store that was raising havoc, and it might have been something that I did accidentally. And that's a long story. That's a whole show. But let's just say that there was a spirit running loose in the store, and it uh, it caused problems. The police started arriving. They said, well, your fire alarm's going off, or your police, your not your fire alarm, the alarm is calling for the police to show up. And we showed them the cables are cut. That bill hasn't been paid in 13 years, and there's no electrical to that, you know, box to our alarm. But it kept pardon me, kept contacting the police and doing things, and actually threw small bits of furniture around, and we had to go do a whole process, kind of an exorcism, and that was there was quite a few people that saw that. Of course, the police saw it, and they weren't happy. They were going to fine us. Well, I say us, but my friends
What?
stopped. They were going to fine us. We have to come down one more time. What are you going to say?
What
Fining
were
us
they
for ghosts?
finding you for?
For they kept getting called to come to the shop, and by the alarm, the break, someone's
Hmm.
broken in. Went, that's not even hooked up. So they were confused and angry and not happy. So yeah, I'd forgotten about that until just now. These things happen. How can you forget about that when I've been here almost 70 years on this planet. I have to say, enough weird things happen, and it's hard to remember all this stuff. But
Yeah.
uh, the besides the one at my aunt, uncle, and the family, and of course, and the one the boat, and then the one at work, and then the one at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. They said please don't tell anybody. So of course I'm telling you and everybody else right now. Um, but she's no longer there. I mean, they went through. I said, "You were like the third event planner in the last 2 years." She goes, "Oh yeah." She says, "People just don't like being locked in here by yourself with, a ghost that likes to make himself, present." So, um, and I get that because the other story you wanted me to share was where I lived, and
Yes.
at one point, my first partner and I moved into um, a place up in West Hollywood, and it was one of those beautiful old stucco French Normandy 1920s castles that architecture was so popular up there at the period. And it was a fourplex, and we were upstairs, and these were huge apartments with big vaulted ceilings and ziggurat doorways and highly polished wood floors and Art Deco light fixtures, and it was pretty amazing. And it was all built in the late 20s, exquisite. And so we moved in, made it beautiful, decorated, and thought this is going to be wonderful. And except that there was a back bedroom that you just got the creepiest feeling in. And every time you went back there, you just did not want to be back there. And you couldn't spend any time there, and you just avoided it. And, rents are not cheap, even back then. In West Hollywood, a big, beautiful apartment. And you're not going to waste a room. But we did. We thought, oh, okay, well, whatever. We'll do with whatever with that. Maybe make it a guest room or something. And just got a strange feeling from it. Also, things began to happen where we would have friends over and we'd be entertaining, and you'd walk towards the back of this big, beautiful apartment, and you'd look through the kitchen into the pantry, and the pantry had a back door that led down the back steps, and the door to the pantry from the kitchen would be open, and the back door would be open. So you'd go down the stairs, lock the door, come back, lock the pantry door, and thought, well, whatever that was. Well, you could do that 3 or 4 times a night. And I kept looking at, my ex saying, will you quit doing that? Well, I'm not doing it. I'm like, well, who's doing this? And, well, you must have done it. What a space case you are. And, don't call me a space. And then you'd walk back again, and the broom was propped up against the door, holding the door open. And that's when we looked at each other. We'd both been in the living room with our friends and went, okay. And then, we started hearing footsteps and footsteps up and down those back stairs. And then the door slamming and the door being propped open again with the broom. And then the back room was just as creepy as could be. And then finally, one late afternoon as the sun was going down, I thought I'd seen a shadow in the hallway. And this gives me chills. I thought I'd seen a shadow in the hallway, and as I leaned out to look, I thought I caught the corner of a shadow, and I was leaning out to look down the hall, and the back door slammed, and
Oh my
the
goodness.
back bedroom door slammed, and loudly, and we both looked, and so we went over to open the door, and we got it open maybe about 4 inches, and it slammed closed on us.
Wow.
And he looked at me and said, "There's somebody in the apartment. Someone's broken in, and get a weapon." And I was running around. I grabbed a hammer, and so I'm watching it. I'm watching him struggle with the door. He'd shoulder it open. We're both young, strong men in our 20s. He's shouldering this door open, and it's slamming closed on. I thought, "Oh my God, when he gets that open, I'm going to have to crack somebody in the head with this." He shoulders the door open. It slams against the wall. Not a soul.
Mm.
Not well, a soul maybe a bit, but nobody was there. We we looked in the closet, and we looked under the guest bed, and we looked around, and we looked at each other and went, "Oh, oh, oh God!" And and there was one other thing that happened just before that, because that was the straw that broke the camel's back. We started packing immediately. Called the
Oh,
landlord.
really?
We're out of here. And but just before that, I'd forgotten. Our friend Louise was visiting, and the guest room we fixed it really nicely. And she is from the area, and she wanted to move back to the area. He said, "Louise, why don't you live with us? Here's the room. It's beautiful. This beautiful apartment. You could stay here until you find yourself an apartment in the neighborhood, and blah blah blah." So she was happy for a couple hours. Her very first night there, she closed the door. She heard footsteps in the dark across the hardwood floor towards the bed, and she was in bed. It was dark. She said, "I just turned the light off, and I heard," she's what I thought was you playing a joke on me. She was walking across the floor, and I felt a hand do this to my face. She's
Oh no.
just
Mm-mm.
run its face across my face. I was expecting to see you there, and I was getting ready to slug you. She's and there wasn't anybody there. She let out a blood curdling scream that all the neighbors heard. And she never even unpacked to stay with us. And she left.
Wow.
And then, like I said, we were hearing footsteps and doors slamming. And finally, that struggle with the back door to the back bedroom that one day. And then that's when we moved out. And
Yeah.
with it, I know, really, you think? And within the week, we hit the moving truck, we were loading it, we got a storage place, whatever. And two little old ladies in the neighborhood, who are my age now, but two little ladies came by arm in arm, and they said, "Oh, you boys didn't stay there very long, did you?" I said, "No, no, no, we're getting out." "Oh, what happened?" I said, "It's haunted." I said, "Stuff happens there that you don't even want to know about." They said, "Oh, we know." They said, "Didn't you know? That's the murder house." And
Oh my goodness.
we said, "What?" And something had happened there, and that was the nickname for the building. And we didn't know, we were from the area. And she goes, "That's where something had happened, and it was notorious." And other people had moved out quickly too. And We were just other people that had moved in and moved out. It was not a good haunting at all. There are good hauntings. There's hauntings you can live with and deal with, and warnings, and like my grandmother's. But there's also things that this is a scary vibe. I'm out of here. So we were out of there. So
Um, I mean, I get it. But if I had to leave, like I've had so many things here in this house, which I've done a couple of videos. I probably need to do a third in this series because I just keep a diary of when stuff
mm-hmm.
happens. But I don't even think I put this one down. And this was it. It's kind of a similar circumstance. There was a lot of us in the house, and I usually keep the bathroom door closed. I don't know why, but I just do. And so we were all here, nobody else here, and my daughter went to go grab the handle, and the door was locked, which never, So then she called her fiance, and she's like, hey, because he was there, and she's like, hey, can you get this door open? And it was like there was somebody on the other side of the door, and they were both just freaking out, having to come apart. I hear all this screaming, so I come to that part of the house, and I'm like, what is going on? And they're like, mom, the door, and they told me, of course, like I'm not dealing with this, but I could feel, yeah, the door was locked. I had to break in the door. Of course, I've always seen things under the door or whatever, the shadows. So it wasn't a surprise to me, but I'm like, well, hey, this is what you get when you live in a haunted house. It just is what it is.
Yeah, it's true. They are there sharing that house, that space with you for some reason, revisiting it or just staying there, and who knows what time is to them. But I did have some friends that built a home. I lived in Santa Cruz for quite a while, and beautiful area there on Monterey Bay. And they had built a beautiful brand new home, and they had a haunting happening taking place upstairs in one of the bedrooms. They walked in, and a book was there. There was no windows open. There was no breeze, but the pages were just turning, and it slammed closed. That happened a few
Yeah.
times,
Wow.
and things would fall off the shelves, and there were thumps and bangs just up there. And I asked him, I said, "Do you want me to do something, possibly burn a little sage or bless the?" No, no, no. You'll just make it angry. So of course, when they had their housewarming, I snuck up there, and I sort of got a feeling that they'd built their house on top of some place where something had occurred, and
Ah,
this spirit was not happy. So I told them what I would tell the spirit in your bathroom. It's like, really? You're going to spend eternity here? And I told them, you're going to spend
right.
eternity in the bathroom. You're going to spend eternity in this little suburban house now that's a cul-de-sac where it used to be a beautiful forest. Or, like, you know
Mm-hmm.
what? You're a spirit. You have all of eternity and all of the planet and all of the universe to visit. And why don't you do that? And I stayed there and did some things. And later on, I didn't tell them I had done that, but they had mentioned, it went away. So that made me
Wow.
feel. I felt terrible that some spirit would be trapped. I watched those ghost haunting shows, and they're like, "Oh, we've contacted a spirit," and they're like, "Great," and they leave. I'm like, "Well, why don't you pray for it or do something or you know help it cross over, point it to the light. Don't just leave it there. If it wants to
Yeah.
stay, fine, but you know, give it a shot. Give it, help it out. I say, we'll help each other out here. We'll help each other out there. So,
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I mean, most things don't bother me, but when you were talking about the hand and the brush, that is my thing. I have two things like don't touch me, you
mm-hmm,
ghosts. Don't even
mm-hmm,
think about touching me. Um, and then the other thing is children ghosts, which I have none of those, thank you God.
mm.
But they freak me out. Little kid
those
ghosts. That's
those
just the
little voices,
stories.
those little
Uh,
voices, the toy
yeah.
rolling across the floor. No, no.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
I'm I'm not good with that. I have had voices here in this house. I'm going to go back to some of the comments because you have a question, and then but I starred some of these, so let me go back. Samantha was talking about, and Samantha is one of my mods on my other channel, and I have never had a need for mods on this channel, so I don't know. Hopefully, I won't. But Samantha says that I was 11 years old. I looked at my aunt out of the blue and just said, "She's gone." Oh, she's talking about her grandmother, I think. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I missed the first one. Um, I remember the day my grandma passed. My aunt and I were in a laundromat. I was 11 years old. I looked at my aunt out of the blue and just said, "She's gone." Um, and then she says, uh, my aunt pulled dripping clothes out of the washers. By the time we got to grandma's house, my mom was there from the hospital. So, like Samantha, that is a big premonition. Um, but she goes on to say that I had seen a picture of my grandma, not sick and yellow with cancer. She was smiling. I just knew. She said she saw, like in her mind's eye, the picture of her grandmother not sick, and that's cool. That is cool, especially when you see them in a better position.
Yeah, they're
And
they're in a better world, they're in a better life, and we're connected. Our hearts are connected, and sometimes it just clicks. I know when at one point one day I paused and I said out loud, I said, I just lost my best friend, and I got the phone call that my best friend had passed away,
wow,
and the day. My father was a smoker. He had emphysema. He was in and out of the hospital for years. And one day in the hospital, he looked at me and he said, I saw your Nana, my grandmother, the one that appeared on the boat. He said, I just saw your Nana sitting in that chair over there smiling at me. And I told him, I said, that's not good. And he laughed, I laughed, and he died that night. He passed away that night.
wow,
He yeah, he passed that night from emphysema. But he had seen my grandmother. And when my grandmother had a heart attack, was in the hospital, they said, oh, you're fine. She said, no, I'm not. She says, I'm looking at the mirror over there, and I can see my three sisters smiling back at me. They're here for me. And she passed that night. So,
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
being in healthcare, we know if somebody even just is not sick, if they start saying things like, my mom, came to see me last night, or, some passed on, we know it's just a matter of time. It could be a few weeks, whatever. But when they start, it's like the veil gets thinner. And I just know if somebody is definitely sick, at work, and they start saying stuff like that, it's like you might as well, they're gonna pass. You already know. Um,
It's so nice to know that we'll be escorted over, that we'll be greeted, and
yeah,
yeah,
I
and
hope we get to choose who lets us pass over. Helps
that's
us.
true. I want someone who's going to introduce me around, you know,
Yeah,
be social.
yeah. I don't want to be rolling my eyes and saying, "Oh my God," you know, they sent
Oh,
you.
not them. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, we're here to make. I want to make peace with us. Oh, I don't.
Yeah, exactly. I'm still really ticked off at you,
Yeah,
so I'll find my own
yeah,
way around. Thank you.
yeah. I blocked you on Facebook. Oh, now you're here. Great.
Absolutely. Tony says, how does your experience with the psychic world affect your everyday life in the corporal world now?
Um, I have to say that um, I had a huge change in my life. The ending of a 25-year relationship with a wonderful person, and it was. I changed as a human being. I changed as a person. I changed my belief system. I opened my heart. I had lost all of my friends to AIDS in the 80s, and I had held that in for years. And at one point, I had to. It just broke out. I went through a lot of sorrow and depression and heartache, and it was a very rough time. And I had to research and find, I defined my spirituality and my belief system in my 20s as all my friends died, which is something that most people do when they're seniors and as their friends and family or their contemporaries are passing. Um, you try and make peace and you prepare. I'm getting towards the end. Well, I was in my 20s, and so I did find my spirituality through these experiences, knowing that there was something, and
Mm-hmm.
but I left it at that. I've never been one for going full bore in one direction or the other. And when people tell me they have all the answers and this is how it is, I'm like, I don't think anybody has all the answers. I left it at uh, these experiences show me that there's something afterwards, that we do continue, that our souls, our spirits, who are our essence moves on, and that um, while we're here, just to be the best people we can and help each. I said we
Mm-hmm.
help each other now. We'll help each other cross over, and so I'm certain of that. So yeah, these these experiences, definitely fed my spirituality, and so I have
Yeah.
a strong spiritual life, I believe, and hoping for the best, and kind of excited to see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you do have some solid sense of an afterlife, I think it does. Just in my opinion, if it doesn't, oh, there's just no hope for you. But I feel I feel like you realize what things are important and what things aren't. And at the end of the day, at the end of life, you're not going to look back and say, "Oh, I wish I had, you know, had more money. Why didn't I spend more time working?" No.
Mm,
I've never heard anybody, and I've spent, just in my profession as a nurse, I have seen so many people pass, and no one, not one, has ever said anything like that. You know,
yeah.
you you just come to the sense of, you know, kindness, goodness,
Hmm.
acceptance, loving people, which is sometimes hard to do. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I have a challenge
Oh,
sometimes, but
yeah. There's a lot of effort goes into that sometimes, and
mhm,
but I pause myself and go, you know what? That's their experience. That's who they are. Who knows what they're experiencing, how they were raised, what is happening in their lives right now. Okay, they're not easy to be around, but try and give them something, and whether it's kindness or love, and I just try and treat people the way I want to be treated, and like since all these paranormal experiences have given me a sense of peace and knowing that there is definitely something afterwards. And I do hope I get to, haunt a few people and harass them, and
me too.
and, and if I go first, I'll definitely come back and move Scully around behind you and shake some things.
You heard
I'll turn
that.
your lights on and off. You'll know it's me.
I've told my daughter, I've told her, of course, I have three kids, but she's the one that wants my house, she says, as a summer home. But whatever. And she has these plans. And I hope that she's young enough that by the time I go, her mind will be changed, because I have a very unique way that I've done my house. It's not modern because I have a historic house. And so, she's in here and she's like, my parlor looks like a dollhouse. And that's the way I meant for it to look, the like a salmon pink walls and white trim and all that kind of stuff. And she's like, Mom, when you pass away, I am going to change it. She loves the 70s. She says it's all going to be like, that olive green and orange. And, I'm like,
Oh,
oh my God. No, I
I
said,
li-
if you,
I lived through that. Oh my God, I lived through that. That was awful.
it was
Yeah,
awful. And I'm like,
yeah.
let me tell you something, little girl. If you mess up my house, I said, you can change the colors, but you got to keep the theme, okay? If you mess up my house, I will come back and haunt you and make your life miserable till you change the colors again.
Well, if you'll notice, a lot of instances of hauntings have occurred when people, they'll be saying, we moved into this house, and at first it was okay, and then we decided to remodel the dot, dot, dot.
Mm-hmm.
or tear out the the such and such that the previous owner had put in. Oh, and that's when they're attached to that. It's maybe they
Mm-hmm.
spent there, and they who knows on what level, but yeah, I do know that previous home that I lived in, that my ex lives in now, I remodeled that house from top to bottom. It's lovely. It is beautiful, and if anybody were to do anything and I had passed on, I think I might, make an appearance here or there. And you certainly know avocado green and harvest gold 70s. Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Ah, yeah. Yeah. Uh, Absolutely. And I think I thought about that when which my house went through a lot of changes, but I did think about that. I wanted to restore it to its original, or as close as I could, because it has had additions and all this stuff, and partially some leftovers, believe it or not, from the 70s. And I'm like, no, 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 that's got to go. But
Well,
go
I was
ahead.
going. Speaking of weird house hauntings, I just remembered my cousins had a home for a short period out in the desert. They thought it'd be cute to live out in the desert and blah blah blah. And it wasn't. It was hot. There was lizards and snakes, and they didn't live there long. And one of the things that happened was occasionally, and it's interesting because my family's Native American, they would see an Indian runner, you know, wearing just like a loincloth and a headband, barefoot, running in the room. We run through the wall, through the room, and out the other wall. And it happened a number of times. And they moved. And it wasn't a certain time. It wasn't a certain time of day. It wasn't, every 13 days or whatever. It just happened occasionally. And it was enough to scare the heck out of them a few times. And they packed up and left. So I thought that was interesting. I guess that house got built on, an old
Yeah.
path. But you never know. We like my friends who built that home. I know they built it on some place where something had was dwelling or something had happened there, and so now the house was haunted. It doesn't have to be an old house. It
True.
spirits are spirits, and I live here in Long Beach, right by the Queen Mary, and a number of people have passed on that ship. And
Hmm.
I have to say, I love cruises. I love ships. If I passed on a ship, I might stay on the ship too. And
Yeah.
it's a beautiful old ship, but there's been a number of things that you just can't deny. And yeah, they've inflated it somewhat, and for the tourists. But I do know somebody who worked there, and he said, "Oh, yeah, a couple times." He goes, "I about screamed," and he would see somebody standing behind him in the reflection in the mirror, turn around, and he said it was a guy in a tuxedo with a top hat, obviously, from the
Wow.
30s with his martini or his champagne or whatever. And he said I'd whip around and he wasn't there. And he said, he goes, I'm just telling you this. He said, it's just, he goes, it can be scary. And I said, he goes, I'm not crazy. I said, no, I can tell you stories. So there's the title of my book. I can tell you stories. So
There you go. I know. Let me go back to. Uh, let's see. A couple of things. Samantha was also saying that with her premonitions, her family, you know, they believe there was no hesitation. They just believed her. But this is something, Rick, that we talk about sometimes on this channel, and that's the premonitions. And Samantha said, I do remember looking back that there were times I would say something like maybe we should go a different way to get somewhere, and my family would go a different way, but there were never questions. And say I do that as well, just out of the blue. I will have a premonition, like just a feeling like, I don't think I'm going to go that way, even though that's the way I go all the time. I'm not going to go that way today. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
yes, and I always tell people, I said, it's important. People do it through meditation or different, things like so I have Wiccan friends and pagan friends, and the way they go about just being in touch with that inner voice and that hunch that whether it is they say your higher self, your spirit guide, your guardian angel, whoever, or an ancestor, a past family member. There's a voice that will tell you you know, oh, go back and check the drawer. I think you left the oven on. Really? And I go, well, it's not on. Okay, that's weird. I don't know why I insist on doing that. Then you go out and you realize as you drive down the street, you just missed an accident by a minute, and
Yeah.
you would have been involved in that. That's happened to me. And, hearing that voice in my head, or I once ran into a friend. I was focused on designing my flowers for this wedding, and I was, for hours in silence, just focused on design and listening. You're in your head, and
Mhm.
I suddenly felt I had to go visit this person. And where I lived in Santa Cruz, the traffic was horrible coming the opposite direction. So I raced down to them, knowing that it would be hell coming back. And I had this whole wedding to design. I was on a tight time frame. And all of a sudden, I was just driving. And what am I doing? What am I doing? Why am I doing this? I got to their door. They weren't there, of course. They were at work. So what am I thinking? And the next thing I knew, I see their car come screeching around the corner. And they jumped out of the car. And they saw me, and they jumped into my arms, threw their arms around me, and just sobbing. And something very, very traumatic had just happened in the family. Just horrific. And then so I was there for them, and then said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I knew you needed me, and if you love somebody, if you have a connection, um, I don't know why I had that premonition about that person's pregnancy. We worked together. I didn't particularly like her. She was the manager, and did, that was kind of a pain in the butt. She was always making me work, and but I knew she was pregnant, and I knew she had twins. And one part I left out, which was sad. I had a very bad feeling throughout her pregnancy. And when she finally had the twins, I was like, oh, okay, I guess everything's okay. And then something happened afterwards to one of the twins. I forget the term, but in the crib. And but I had had a bad feeling, and I thought, well, I don't know why I was connected that, and I don't know why certain things do, or I don't know why I haven't seen my mom or my grandmother. We were so tight, and but perhaps they realized I'd have heart attacks. They appeared to me, but I do talk to them all the time in my heart. Whether you call it prayer or meditating, um, I do speak to them, and I know that they do hear me. And you know, uh, there's been some tough times, and I do know that if I can turn to anybody, it's them. So.
Yeah. That it's great that you have that kind of experience. I mean, there's maybe a few of my relatives that I would ask a question to if I ever thought about it, but most of them, Rick, I come from a crazy family. I'm like, you know what? I see what y'all did. just keep your opinions to yourself, okay?
Mm.
I'll figure this out. um, but it's just different dynamics, I guess. And he does have a. I'm gonna ask you to tell your UFO story in the. I don't know how to say it. The abbreviated for. I mean,
The
we talked about this.
the family friendly version.
Yes, because and I will tell y'all, we talked for hours on the phone yesterday,
Mm.
and he told me the actual story, and it is not YouTube friendly, so we're not going to say it that way, but it is hilarious. It is so funny. By the way, I told my daughter later that day when I got back
Oh,
home,
great.
and I was like, "Oh, she thought it was funny too. She thought it
Yeah.
was hilarious." But
Well,
just the encounter. Okay.
I'll paraphrase or use euphemisms or hint. Um, I was young, and I was very lucky when I was about 16. A buddy of mine was teaching me how to surf, and loved it. Huntington Beach, here in California, and it was the 70s, 1974, actually 75. And I made this wonderful group of friends. Well, who knew there were a bunch of gay surfers? Who had ever heard of gay surfers? I hadn't. And I was, closeted. I was 16. I didn't, say anything or do anything. And so they took me under their wing, and I met this wonderful group of guys, and we were all between the ages of say 16 and 19, 21, 20. We weren't old enough to get in clubs or anything. So we hung out. We made our own fun, and we spent the days at the beach, sunning, surfing. At night was parties, and the '70s was a big party. And we all had big muscle cars and convertibles, and we raced all over Southern California. So one night, there was no particular party taking place anywhere, and none of the clubs, would let us in. They'd look at our fake IDs and go, "Out, get out of here." So we're like, oh, okay. So we just, they called it a joyride. And we jumped in my buddy's car, and he was from Atlanta, and he, uh, we called him the George Peach, and he was this crazy great guy, and he had this Rambler, this old Rambler that he had painted Ramblin' Rose on the side of it, and put a big plastic rose on the antenna, and then filled it with a bunch of crazy gay boys. So we stood out like a sore thumb. We were racing around, and he was the one that didn't have the big muscle '70s muscle car. He had this old Rambler. So for some reason, we were in that car. We went rambling around, and we ended up in Topanga Canyon, just Malibu, North Los Angeles. And you could access Topanga Canyon from the beach, and we were always at the beaches. So it was nighttime, and we went up, and we had been partying, raising hell, and we ended up way in Topanga Canyon, and we parked. And there was about six of us who were blaring music and having a crazy time and laughing and joking. And suddenly, bang! It was right there. It was a huge bright light. We thought, oh God, no. The LAPD is known for its helicopters, and once they put that bright light on you, you're done. You're done. That's when all of a sudden put your hands on the car, everyone, empty your pocket, and all hell breaks loose. And next thing you know, the police cars arrive and you're in handcuffs. And this was the '70s. We're like, oh no. Because, there's a lot of stuff happening that was definitely, we could have been dragged away for a while. And we're all kids. We're like, oh no, our parents, oh no. And so there's this bright light on us. It's about 300 feet away and about 100 feet up the hill. And we're up in the canyon. That's nighttime. It's dark. And we're all running around the car. We're throwing bottles and running in circles and doing things. And it must have been a ridiculous sight. And we're screaming and freaking out. And then eventually we all just looked at each other and looked up at the light. And it was like, there's no sound. There was no helicopter. It's like,
Right.
you know, I live up here on the 13th floor in Long Beach, and occasionally, we'll go by with the spotlight chasing somebody. I'm like, whoa, you can't miss it. Well, here, perfectly silent up in the canyon, except for us, screaming, freaking out. And so we're staring at it. I'm like, well, this is weird. So it's on me, and it went, wah! And it took off at like a 45-degree angle, like so quick. You ever play with a laser pointer and just do that? It was literally fade up into the sky. We went, and we all screamed and freaked out because we all knew what that was, what that meant. Okay, that's not a
Right.
helicopter. That is a, and we just went, oh my god! And we jumped to the car, and then bing, it was back, but further back up the canyon, and then it slowly started to come towards us. Well, that's when Steve just gunned it, and we took off down the canyon, just flying down, this windy canyon roads at night, as fast as the Rambler would take us. And I'm laughing hysterically because everybody else is silent. And I just started laughing, and I had tears in my eyes. What is Rick? What is so funny? I was like, that's obviously a UFO. It's from an advanced civilization, extraterrestrial. It could probably bend time and space and, and gravity. And we're trying to outrun it in a Rambler. And and we all started cracking up. We're all gearheads and car freaks. We're laughing. It was a shame we were in the Gary in your Camaro, because I still don't think we can outrun it. My friend Jim's like, I've got that '63 Buick Ruby. I think we can outrun it. And Steve's driving. He's like, just shut up, and he's freaking out. He's flying down the canyon, and we thought, well, maybe we could party with them. That'd be fun. Maybe they let us on the ship if they're gonna. We hear those stories where they kidnap you, and we're like, you think we can get music? They must have a radio. We could probably get our music. Disco was big at the time. We've got beers on us, and we thought we'll have a big party with it. Hey, this will be fun. We're all just laughing and talking about this could be really. And then it went ding, and it took off. And we waited. We kind of pulled over and stopped, and we all looked. We looked at each other, and we started laughing. Well, oh, okay. Well, okay. Well, that was something. And then, well, where do you want to go now? And let's go back. And we drove back to Long Beach. And for years, we'd occasionally go, hey, remember that night? Blah, blah, blah. And we'd laugh. And that's pretty much how we left it. It was like, remember our UFO experience? And people would tell people, they'd go, did you lose any time? Or did you wake up with any marks on you? No, they just kind of like scanned us and then they left. And I think I told you, I said, it is said that, in a UFO experience, the aliens can communicate telepathically and they can read your mind, what's happening. And I think they tapped into what was happening, with us in the car and went, oh, hell no, and just left.
No
Well, no,
parties
no,
with the Earthlings.
no, no, no. We're not, no, not those guys. No, not at all. No. And yeah, they locked the door and took off. They're like, yeah, we're not going back to this planet. So, yeah.
And then
But
there weren't any UFO sightings for a while, though.
what's crazy is I happened to be on YouTube and I saw a show about UFOs, blah blah. So I typed in my message, yeah, blah blah blah. I was up in Topanga Canyon, boom, all these messages and then links. It turns out, if you get on YouTube and look around, Topanga Canyon is this hotbed of UFO activity for the last 50, 60 years.
Wow.
Who knew? And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, that makes sense. So people say, well, you've had paranormal experiences, you have the UFO, you've had this. I said, well, I spent a lot of time um, just enjoying life and running around and being with friends and putting myself out there and going to different countries and experiencing different people and different lives and you know just living. And you do that passionately, you're going to have some experiences. You're going
Yeah.
to have some experiences. So those are mine, a few
Yeah.
of them.
That is really cool. I love to hear people tell their stories. I love it when people, y'all, send your stuff in, and I'm just gonna throw this out there. If anybody wants to, I know some of y'all have sent me multiple stories. Somebody wants to come on panel and tell your stories, please let me know. Email me, and we can make it happen. But yeah, that's the thing, Rick. You've lived such a very rich and diverse life, and then having all of these experiences. And let me tell y'all, he is such a sweet person, such a nice, beautiful soul. So, I learned that
Thank you.
quickly when we were on the phone yesterday, of just he's very kind. He's very considerate and thinking of others, which I think, again, if you are involved with a paranormal, you have these experiences, I think it tends to push you that way. Um,
Yeah.
Rick, what kind of advice would you give to anybody who sees a spirit or something, has a paranormal experience for the first time?
I would I would say to take a deep breath, not panic, and think. Try and get a feeling. So, what are they trying to tell me? Why are they doing this? Why are they letting me see them now? What are they trying to
Hmm.
show me or to communicate? Often someone said, "Well, I felt my throat was being constricted," and found out later this person had been choked. They're trying to communicate what their experience was, and if they can't do it telepathically or actually say something, that they are literally showing you physically what happened to them, and it can be frightening. Or if they show you a certain thing that seems frightening, that's maybe how they passed. I always say that I say, is there something I could do for you? Do you want me to pray for you? I did live. Here's something else. Here's something I forgot about. The last couple of years,
Go ahead.
well, I was waiting for this apartment to come up, my cousin said, "Hey, why don't you move in with my father-in-law? He's 90. He lives alone. He's got this big, huge, beautiful home in Huntington Beach, and he could use some company and extra income." So I moved in. And then later on, my cousin, she says, "Oh, by the way, yeah, the place is haunted." I'm like, "Oh, of course it is." And her daughter had a number of experiences there. She's the one in the family that inherited, she's the one that the ghosts actually follow around. But a number of things. And, he's a very conservative, he was former engineer, military, very conservative. And he told me, he said, "Oh, yeah, my wife used to send me upstairs all the time, say someone had broken in, was stomping around, but I finally had to tell her it's the ghost." So where did they put me? He put me up in the upstairs in the ghost room, and yeah, there was some stomping around, and you could feel the energy. I never saw anybody. He saw dark shadows, and I heard a few stops and things, but I immediately, when I got there, said, I hear there's somebody here. If you can hear me, I'm trying to communicate with you. Do you want me to pray for you? Do you want me to help you into the light? I don't want to assume that I could even have the ability to do that, but is there something I could do to make you happy or help you move on? Like I said, you have the entire universe at your fingertips. You're a spirit. You can go anywhere, and or feel free to stay here if this was your home, or this is where you want to be. But if you do want anything from me, I am not afraid. I was a little afraid, actually. And don't appear and say boo, or I'll be joy. I did tell them, I said, don't suddenly appear. You'll scare me. I'll have a heart attack. I'll die. And then you're stuck with me forever. So I said, but if you want me to, I would advise people, say, do you want me to help you into the light? Is there anything I can do for you? Just know that, um, I'm there for you, because that's not a position I would want to be stuck somewhere after I pass. I would want to be guided to the light and have someone escort me over, or at least help me towards a happier eternity. So I would think, be considerate of the spirit that you
Yeah.
encounter, and what their intent is.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like we have a handbook that tells us what to expect after you're dead. It's like, are you gonna be? What if nobody greets you? I mean, what
Yeah.
if you're just standing there like
Hmm.
Ebenezer Scrooge and you've lived a
Hmm.
horrible life and like nobody
Hmm.
wants to come get you?
Well,
You
he,
have to wonder.
he was redeemed at the end, so I think and he did make three spirit friends that one night, so somebody must have helped him. So, but I think it's a matter of being conscious of it too. I think people with different religions, belief systems, their experience afterwards is what they believe in and what they're expecting,
Mm,
and
true, probably, yeah.
so and I think if somebody doesn't expect anything, they have a big surprise, waiting for them. It might take a bit for them to, say, okay, well, I'm obviously not alive. What's happening here? So, it's got to be difficult. It's got to be difficult for some. So,
Well, I've
um,
seen enough movies. I don't know if it happens this way, but I've seen enough movies to know that when you die and your spirit leaves, you see your body in whatever condition it was. So I guess if
mhm.
I'm ever walking around and I see my body, I'm just going to assume, oh, well, I guess I died. So,
Something's
like,
up.
what? Yeah. Okay,
My,
what's my next step?
my mother had, she was Gigi, her little dog, just got into the bed. She got turned off, I laid back, got comfortable. And I felt like a balloon. She said, and I floated up. I really was floating up towards the ceiling, and I could see my body, but I was translucent, and I could see my body down there. Well, it turns out this wasn't. This was very close to when she had a brain tumor bleed out, which finally, took her life. So she had a experience before she passed that was,
Wow.
she had something happen, and she had out of the body experience, and I told her, and as she lay in the hospital bed, I told her, I said, you can go now, Mom. Nana's waiting for you. Your brother, Uncle Ray, my dad, her sister. I said the whole fam damly, as she used to call it. I said, the whole fam damly is there waiting for you. And I said, give them my love. And it's odd. I had a very, very realistic dream uh, soon after she passed. One of those dreams where you wake up and you could still hear it and feel it. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
that wasn't a dream. I was there. And huge part in my it was all everybody in the dream was my family that had passed, and they were all dancing, and my mother, but they were all young again, and my mom was dancing. She loved to dance with my dad. They'd swing dance and Lindy, and they were singing. She's swing dancing, and she looked over at me and gave me a nod like that, and just kept dancing, and I was like,
Wow.
huh. And my aunt, who was the party person, was hosting the party, the one that had the yacht, and she was
Yeah.
hosting the party, and everybody was laughing at the music. And I pulled back. I thought, oh, well, save me a dance.
Wow.
I said, save me a dance, Ma. Save me a dance.
Absolutely. Um, so that's beautiful. That is a beautiful dream. Um, Samantha is asking, Rick, have you ever encountered something you knew was not just a ghost?
Yes. Um, I didn't want to go there. Didn't want to creep anybody out. But there are entities that were never people, and
Mm-hmm.
there are there are things, more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are known to you, as to quote Shakespeare somewhat. Um, One thing I learned through my spiritual journey, many cultures have stories of little people and fairies and this and that. You're like, yeah, sure, fine. Or demons. And of course, if you're a Christian, you believe in demons or devils or dark
Mm-hmm.
energy or so. And so there are different interpretations of different spirits. There's a term, oh goodness, I can't think of the term right now, but um, they they exist whether in the woods or in the air or in the sea. There's little spirits, and the one where my friends built that home, that was a built onto property that no one ever lived there, and it was
Mm-hmm.
woods, and no one had ever lived there. And now it was as we encroach on animals in their territory, and we're chasing all these animals off, and there's problems with bears and deer. Well, we're on their property.
Mm-hmm.
They encroached on when they built their home on something that where when an elemental, that's the term, the elementals. And anyway, it was an elemental of the forest, and because when I did go up into the bedroom, it was one, and I got a feel of it. And I thought, this is not a person. And it was very angry, and it was very bitter, and it was, it had an animalistic quality, and it was not happy. In fact, they had heard it growl at them once.
Oh,
That was a
wow.
nice touch of the story I'd left out. They said we went up in the room. He said Steve went up there and it growled at him, and he went running out of the room screaming. I'm like, oh, okay. So I knew that going into, and I did have the feeling that, and I still went up there. Okay, I'll help it. And I actually, at one point, I felt it was very sad, and it made me cry. I had tears in my eyes, and I said, when I told this little creature, this entity, I said, to move on. Go live by a waterfall in Big Sur, just down the coast. You, it's beautiful here. You
Yeah.
want to go to Beverly Hills, whatever, but you could go anywhere. But there was a definite feel that that was not a human spirit. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
like any of the others I'd encountered. And the one in the metaphysical shop, this person had felt that he had a spirit attached to him, and a couple people had approached him that were intuitive or psychic and said, I have a feeling there's a spirit attached to it. He's like, I know. And but a couple people told him, we think it could be an ancestor and who's attached themselves to you. And he could feel their presence, and it was frightening him. And so I had done my best to the term is called banish. And one rainy, dark night, there we were in this witchcraft store, and I was lighting candles and trying to banish this spirit from him. And we were exceptionally close. and I knew I could do this, and so I did this whole thing, and I banished this. And he said, I really feel like it's like good. And I said, wonderful. Well, later on, someone told me the detail of I didn't banish it anywhere in particular. I just banished it, so it stayed in the store. It stayed in the area there. I could have sent it off to another, a realm or like someplace,
Mm-hmm.
someplace a different realm or spirit realm. Instead, I was like, leave my friend alone, adios, and it stayed in the store and threw furniture around and you know played with the alarms, the electrical, and the police arrived, and the alarms kept going off that were disconnected. And yeah, it was that was not mischievous, but kind of a problematic spirit, and that was a person. But the one that wasn't a person was you definitely got a very, very not demonic, but this is something of a different, a
Yeah,
different kind of
a
entity,
different
you know.
feel. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Um, let's see. You have another question. Angie Thompson is asking, Rick, what are your thoughts on sleep paralysis versus the night hag?
The night.
Hag.
Oh, the
H.
night hag. Right.
Yeah.
I think. I think. Sleep paralysis can be brought on by a number of things, whether it's mental, physical, things that are happening in your life, and but then there's the story of the night hag that will, that comes. And I think that's how people are interpreting it when they're in this panic mode. Um, my ex Tony, he knows that we had some friends that were very successful and lived down in Carmel Valley, and we would have never expected the story from her. But she said she was a very successful real estate agent in Carmel Valley. These homes were multi-millions, and these were very sane, upstanding, people, and they have lots of money, so you believe what they say, whatever. And she told us because she knew about my spiritual, beliefs that at night a spirit had been on her chest and she couldn't see it, but she felt it pressing on her chest and forcing its way down her throat. And she's never been so terrified in her life. She literally prayed and screamed and struggled and used all of her mental capacity to get this entity off of her. Now, you hear that from anybody, and you're like, oh, okay, well, that's sure, okay, you're a little crazy. Um, but this is one person that would never share that story unless she felt safe, and she would not make something like that up, and she wasn't attention seeking, and she wasn't crazy. Spirit in this old adobe building that they had bought and converted to a spectacular home there in Carmel Valley was, definitely physically I don't know whether they're trying to possess her, but yeah, some spirits will, and there's quite a few instances of them. Literally, you feel the pressure on you, and you're paralyzed. You have night paralysis, and you cannot move, and that may be the way they try to mobilize you. And I did have that happen once at the haunted apartment. I could not move, and I um, can't believe I left this part out. It has been years, it's all coming back talking to you, but I was in bed and I couldn't move. And I thought, what is going on? And I saw a silhouette standing in the doorway, and it looked like the old TV screens when they would get, they called it snow or static, but it was in the
Right.
shape of a person. And I heard a voice say, my name is Robert. And then it just went, and and I could move, but I don't know. Maybe spirits can immobilize you certain times, and but the important thing is to if you do feel as if you're being like assaulted or they're crossing the line, is to focus your intent, your heart, your energy, and your spirit, and just say, no, this is unacceptable. This is unacceptable.
Yeah.
And because we're alive, we have just as much spirit as they do, and yeah, yeah, get off me.
Yeah. I had that experience one time. It's been many years ago, but never since never since then. But yeah, and I heard somebody explain, and I don't know that I believe this, but uh, she explained that your spirit leaves your body when you sleep, and that when you feel that, it's just you trying to get back into your body. And I'm like, if you haven't experienced it, there's a lot of fear, there's
Hmm.
a lot of emotion that goes with that. And I think if it's coming from you, if you just can't
Yeah.
get back in your body. I don't know. I didn't fully buy that. I'm like, yeah, whatever. But that's not, I can say that's not what I experienced. Mine was more of definitely a dark energy. um
Yeah, all of us are just trying to explain what these experiences are. Some may feel it's that. Everybody's got an idea. Everyone's
mhm,
got a theory. And I don't think any of us know exactly what it is. You just know what your experience was and how you feel about it and how it felt at the time, what was happening to you. And I felt, like I was I was just trapped in my body, and that maybe this entity had had done that to me, so I could be present and they could communicate. And obviously they had had a horrible experience, and I won't even relate what happened to them in that apartment. We found out later, and it was horrific, and
mhm,
so it explained why they were still there. They were trying to contact, say, this is what happened to me. So and like I said, I interpreted that one spirit that in my friend's home they had built. I interpreted it as an elemental. It didn't feel like a human spirit. So all of us,
mhm.
and but there's the easy ones, like my grandmother appearing saying, go home, and so they turned the boat around. They went home. They lived.
Yeah.
If they turned the boat
Yeah.
around, they might not. The boat might have sank. They might have gone down with the boat. So and in the storm. So there's all so many different experiences. We're just occasionally the veil gets thin. Occasionally things cross over. We cross over. We get a feeling. We get a hint. They give us hint. They cross over. It's back and forth, and then we just interpret it as best we can. And
Mhm.
and that's all we can do. That's all we could do. And then
Yeah.
you know and try and experience it. Like I said, just don't leave them hanging. Say, can I do something for you? Is there something you need? Is that why you're coming to me? Or, you know, and
Yeah.
and help them if you can. Pray for them. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. um and somebody was mentioning, and I think this is true just based on my own experiences, that, and I can't use the exact words that are in chat, but abuse, let's just put it that way.
Mhm.
Abuse
Mhm.
of different kind, it can make an imprint on a property, on a place. And
Mhm.
I mean, sometimes you can, people who are seers can recognize that something horrible happened in this place, because it's like a heaviness, it's like an imprint that maybe nobody else sees and feels, but it is imprinted, in my opinion, in that
Yeah. It's
place.
often said it's almost like a movie that's been printed on film, and it's
Yeah.
there in the stone, in the building itself, on the property, and it just repeats and repeats and repeats, and it's not a conscious haunting. It is an imprint of something horrendous that happened. Now, the Civil
Hmm.
War. There's so many in your area, and we're soldiers seen in uniform
Hmm.
marching through the trees, and the cannons are there. And then, that was how many hundreds of thousands of young boys died, how much blood was
Right.
spilled in terrible war. So it left a
Hmm.
terrible imprint that repeats. That repeats.
Yeah, especially in Gettysburg. So many people have
Yeah.
paranormal experiences in Gettysburg, and that was one of the worst. I mean, I would say also the South had their fair share of, during Sherman's march to the sea. A lot of horrific things happened, and it's, I don't know how you get rid of that kind of thing, but it's horrible. And I think that sometimes people, I mean, I know there have been times that I've lived in places that it just seemed like I was more angry all the time, just,
Hmm.
or something, or depressed, or whatever, just being in that place. And then once you move, you realize, hey, like you feel like a big weight has been lifted off of you. And, if you're if you're consciously experiencing things like that, try to get a history on the house too. Find out what
Mm-hmm.
happened if you can. Some things don't make the news, private
Yeah.
uh, situations that happen can, you don't know. It's family secrets. But
Mm.
if you can get any kind of history, that's helpful for trying to get rid of stuff. And that's what I think anyway. Um,
Those
let's see.
those two those two elderly ladies that walked past as we were packing to leave the apartment, they said, "Oh, didn't you know? That's the apartment where dot dot dot." And we were just like, "Oh, now they tell us. Great, wonderful." So
Yeah. That would have been great
that, but
information to know.
yeah, as we were moving in, that would have been nice to know. But yeah, there was a heaviness there, and as beautiful it was my dream apartment. It was, just unbelievably beautiful. It was breathtaking. And there I was 19, and Richard was like 27 or something, and we had this beautiful home, and that I filled with Art Deco furniture and potted palms, and it was just this amazing location, and it was the creepiest, most uncomfortable, awkward, and then
Mm,
the bangings and the thumpings and the touching and and just like something had happened there so bad that it had um, imprinted itself, and I felt that the spirit there was, not at rest at all. And
mm,
I think back, I wish I had been more conscious. I was 19, more aware of, possibly being able to help that spirit and help it move on, or at least sympathize with it, or say, I know, I'm so sorry, And
yeah.
but I wasn't aware at the time, and it's interesting is I just moved back to L.A. from California within the last couple of years, and I ended up actually being in a situation where I was in that neighborhood and I drove past. That building's been torn down and there's a brand new building. So I
Wow.
just saw that my battery's very low and I
Oh
cannot
no.
reach my cable.
Oh no. Okay. If we lose you, we lose you. Tony has one question, and then we'll close out. Um, do you remember the two elderly ladies in LA who told us about the Spanish kitchen?
Yes, yes. And that's what I love about LA. All these old neighborhoods, the people who lived there for years and years. And we were looking in the old Spanish Kitchen restaurant, and it had sat there for 40 years, closed up, and the windows were the curtains were in tatters, but the tables were still set for dinner. And this restaurant, this beautiful old restaurant from the 40s, and there had been something traumatic that happened there, and it was a love triangle, and the wife had we found out these two old ladies came by and said, you know the story? And they told us how this love triangle had ended the restaurant, closed it down, moved up. They had an apartment upstairs. She owned the pharmacy on the corner who brought her meals 3 times a day, and she never left her apartment ever again. And she was up there until her final day. And but
Wow.
this was in the 80s, and she had closed the restaurant down in the 40s, and she was still up there after losing her husband and her lover, and it was quite the story, quite the old Hollywood story. And you know what? I wonder now about that building because if she went up there, moved up there, was up there all those years, and that happened downstairs, that was spooky as it was. I wonder if there's anything happening there now. Be interesting to talk to the people who are there
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. It really would.
I wanted to talk to the people that were in the new building where my old apartment was and went, have you had anything? But, I just,
Yeah, because sometimes they stick around even when the buildings change. I've had a
yeah.
lot of stories like that where, there used to be on this property, an old hospital or something like that. Heard a lot of those. And I don't want you to like just do a disappearing act goodbye. So I want to get everybody the chance to say, goodbye. I have
Thank,
thoroughly enjoyed this you telling your stories, and I know everybody
that's a
else
lot.
will.
Thank you for the opportunity. I love your show. Like I said, I tune in. It's like seeing an old friend. I enjoy you so much, and you're such a good spirit, such a good soul, and you tell these
Thank you.
wonderful stories. And I just enjoy it so much, and it's been an honor and just a pleasure getting to talk to you and to be here and share this and see you again.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I was gonna say something else. Of course, y'all, I would love to hear have other people on, but Rick, yeah, I know it's a lot sometimes. Going back through your very interesting life. I know we'll talk again. Um, Anything happens, you want to you've got some great stories, even not paranormal related. You've got some great stories. I
Oh boy,
appreciate. And if y'all are watching on the replay, which I know most people watch on the replay, whatever time, please give a thumbs up for Rick. Show him some love. Tell him, you know, that you appreciate him giving up his time for tonight. And I am going to uh, bounce on out of here too. Uh, I'm looking at the chat. Just don't want to miss anything. All right. Y'all have a wonderful night. Stay safe wherever you're at. There's so many storms coming across the U.S. Again, thank you, Rick. I will see you
thank
later.
you, thank
Whatever.
you. See you soon.
Whatever y'all do, stay spooky. Bye bye.
All